Hello, and welcome to A Dash of Salt. I'm Dr. Shelley Ann, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you stumbled upon this podcast by accident or you're here because the subject drew you in, welcome. SALT is an acronym for Society and Learning Today. This podcast was created as an outlet for inviting fresh discussions on sociology and learning theories that impact your world. Each episode includes a wide range of themes that focus on society and everyday learning, whether formal or informal. So let's get stuck in, shall we? Welcome to A Dash of Salt. Today I'm joined by Victoria Procunier. She's a friend of mine who lives in Canada. I'm delighted to have you on the podcast today to speak with you about unlearning and challenging how you think.
Hey, so great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Victoria, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your education, and your professional background?
Sure. I'm currently the Senior Vice President for Sales and Client Success at a content marketing agency here in Toronto called Fifth Story. My education, I have graduated from a postgrad program for corporate communications at Seneca College. Prior to that, I completed 2 degrees at Queen's University in Canadian Studies and Politics, as well as English Literature.
And Victoria wanted to talk about the subject of unlearning. And unlearning is learning to think, behave, or perceive things differently when there are already beliefs or behaviors or assumptions that have been learned over time. And these behaviors get in the way of more forward thinking or more advanced thinking. So this is going to be our conversation together. And the first question that I have for you, Victoria, is why does this idea of unlearning interest you?
I guess I like to challenge assumptions. And when I was thinking about this topic and what other people might like say to this and why it interests me also is I like to ask a lot of questions. I think in my job, I actually came back to this job after I left Canada and went to Ireland and then came back. And the owner, I remember she told me one of my greater assets was my ability to ask good questions. And so I think for me, it's always trying to understand why something is. And I would say that one of the pivotal moments for me for probably putting me on this path was in university. It was a second year political science, sort of a core course. And it was just a discussion as to how people value terms like democracy, big terms like that, differently. And the fact that even you and I, Shelley, we could talk about the very same thing and think different things about it, like value it differently. And that really started to hit home to me when after my formal education, which is why I was really appreciated hearing about this course that I could do afterwards. In college, I actually did a course on negotiation, and again, sort of another extension of how people value things differently. And again, unlearning or relearning how you understand something to know how someone else might understand it differently, or being open to that. One of the other key examples that I'll tell people about is my negotiation class. The gentleman that was leading it talked about, say you and I, are very interested in having this orange. And because there's a win-lose kind of perception in society, probably our thought is you and I can share that orange and have half of it. And then through further discussion, which really opened my mind for even further, is the fact that if we just had a discussion, we might, understand that I just wanted the rind of the orange because I wanted to bake with it and you wanted to eat the orange. And thus we both could have 100% of what we wanted. But because of, how I would say we're conditioned in the society that we live in, our first guess is that I don't want to lose something by telling you too much. And so the little moments along the way, I think from schooling and then, working, that I've realized I've called it different things. But unlearning is exactly as you said there, is just looking at something, not necessarily giving up, or saying that what you learned before isn't true, but recognizing there's different truths to the same sort of situation. And I think my idea of constant learning also is driven by the fact that if I ever find myself being like, oh, this is going to be easy street now, I was like, whoop, all of a sudden the warning bells go off and I was like, and I'll pull back and I'd be like, I better change things up. Because to me, complacency is like the worst thing, because that to me leads to, a lack of trying to understand, more about the world. And so I have a habit of shaking things up. Um, right from my high school days, I got myself into high school where I knew no one. And I kept on doing that. And that's even moving to Ireland. And everyone's like, who do you know there? And whatnot. I'm like, nobody. I know nobody. But still, it's not that it's not scary, but I learned so much just by, as I say, just changing my surroundings, and again, challenging what I know to be true, but still finding things where there's a commonality. And so it definitely, when people talk of lifelong learning, I try to live that by just experiencing life in different ways, both with, formal education as a foundation. I always wish that I could like duplicate myself so I could go back to school but still work. But then I supplement that with, reading different things and making new friends like yourself that can, provide a different insight. I remember with your thesis on volunteerism was really great to learn more about how that actually works. Because as you know, that's with Go Dot International, I'm kind of a lifelong volunteer. I always find myself, it's another place to learn, but also to give back. Because I think that's something too, is you can take, but there's, I see myself as someone who can encourage others to find value within themselves. Like, because sometimes it's just that little bit of encouragement, or just because I can see things a little bit differently, I can really see the good where someone maybe doesn't see it themselves. And they just need that little push. And that's why I like the volunteerism. I was mentoring a little bit there too, where sometimes the ladies just need to know that they were doing a good job, because we don't always have those checks and balances, especially as you get older. I mean, in school, you get a gold star, but in life, there really aren't any gold stars given out. So I think we can do that ourselves for each other. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
like in a roundabout way, that's the constant process of learning and relearning, especially I find in the past number of years that we've had a lot of challenges to, what we know to be true.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And I think that sometimes with unlearning, you know, what we already know may be actually what prevents us from knowing more. And there's whether it now just to let everybody know, unlearning is a concept that it has become very prevalent in this 21st century, but it isn't just for one particular sector or for one particular area or group of people. Unlearning is a concept that is taken very seriously in the business world, in your personal life for personal enrichment, in education, and also this area of social and societal unlearning, challenging the way you used to think about things and how you think about them now. What we already know may often be a stumbling block in what prevents us from knowing more. And Victoria, you touched on something as well. You talked about building on a foundation and sort of basic principles, and then what you do with it and where you go from there. Why do you think that we are so hesitant to let go of old ways?
well, it's an interesting one. And just as you were speaking there, is what sort of came to mind. And it's probably something that I continue to wrestle with and need to educate myself more on, is understanding privilege. I think from my own personal experience, is it's not even, the idea of letting go. It's even understanding that it's there, because as we've learned, and my own reference point is I am a woman, identify as a woman, and I am visibly Caucasian. And I live in Canada, in Toronto. I've had a pretty good upbringing, in terms of, there's been challenges, but in terms of socioeconomic kind of conditions, they've been fairly optimal for me. growing up. And what I realized is I didn't even know I had to learn or challenge my own understanding of the world. But as I was listening to some of the movements, and my own sort of reference point was the Me Too movement, and how much the male family members didn't understand. And I, again, a privileged woman, and also tall in stature, so I'm not even like, I'm a little bit imposing, I guess you could say too. But the fact that, like, I was telling my brothers that, if I'm leaving on a Sunday night and the sun has started to go down, that I have to think, I'm like, okay, there's a risk. I have to get between my parking lot to my apartment. And I live in a pretty good area, but there's a risk. And I said, do you know, every time I park at this time of night, I wonder if someone might attack me. And I said, and I normally don't like to make very broad statements, but I said, I'm pretty darn sure 100% of women feel the same way. Mm-hmm. And I said, I normally don't make blanket statements, but I'm pretty sure if you asked any woman, walking, in downtown kind of area, if she would not look over her shoulder. I used as a reference, I said, if I can feel as a woman that men don't understand what I go through, like, even without even understanding those movements, of course it is true. And so I said to people, like you have to challenge your assumptions, because it's been surprising. And even with now COVID, and I feel like we've just had so many different things challenging our assumptions, recognizing the world around you when it's just very easy to go through your day-to-day and just kind of stay in that lane, I guess you could say, of your life, and not challenging yourself to know that there's something better. And in terms of why people find it difficult, Sapiens, one of the first sort of opening chapters, he talks about the fact that the figments of our imagination sort of differentiate us from other species in our ability to construct these sort of stories. And I mean, we would know this, but not really think about it. But countries don't exist. We've defined them ourselves. We go to jobs with companies that don't even physically exist anymore. They're just sort of an idea. And so there's certain constructs, but again, I guess for unlearning is within that sort of structure, do we just follow a path, or is there a space for unlearning or freedom within that? I believe we can be better, but I also feel you have to have a dose of realism to understand what actually is possible, but also to push boundaries. But I think there has to be a healthy dose of those. You can't all of a sudden decide, I'm not going to work anymore because I decided that's not how I want to work. The world is still going to sort of guide you into that. But I think that there's certain places where you can have meaningful impact and freedom. You just have to find them.
Yeah. That idea of breaking those established patterns in society, but also keeping an open mind and understanding the changes that are necessary.
It's a challenging thing, and every time it's being open and to listen and then to figure out what can I do in a sense of activism. And I mean, I wrestled with this, what am I capable of, and I realized that I needed to start not just with obviously with yourself, you have to start there, but then with the people closest to me, where I could have the impact. Because when you talk about unlearning, it's going against what they know to be true. And so, just as another example, people are like, I can't understand why people don't want to take the vaccine, or I was like, because we've been conditioned, in terms of, now mind you, it did take a year or so to come with the vaccine, so it has taken time, but the message people were getting that it happened too fast. And are we not the world today where something is fast and cheap? And so it's already in our brain that, oh, it can't be good if it happened fast. But yet, again, this is a second year university course where we talked about planned obsolescence. And it was the idea that things are actually, in a different way, are planned to break down. So to keep you buying things, I think the example at the time was, if you invested in your first car was a Rolls Royce, you would only need one, because those cars are actually planned not to break down. like in terms of quality. But we don't necessarily ask these questions, and consumerism, you need to get the latest phone, you get the latest laptop, and it hasn't maybe occurred to people that actually has been planned, that behavior. So that's why that feeds into other parts of our understanding. And so when people were saying, I can't understand this, I'm like, I can. It's like, everything in it, because it's not, the pandemic is a very serious situation that we've all obviously been living through, but it's like, what contributes to fears? Well, we've been told to think one way, and now we're like, no, that's okay. We can get a quality product out, if we all work together. And it's fascinating because I work in a world of marketing and communication and advertising. And you might have heard this before too, that, you go into a McDonald's and it's like, God, it smells the same. It's because they have a scent. like even in a car, there's a new car smell. It's actually manufactured so that it evokes this kind of emotional response. But sort of when you see these bigger things happen, you're almost not surprised how there can be this kind of fear. Not to mention we haven't seen in our lifetime a pandemic. I think it's always been equated similar to the Spanish flu, I think is the closest sort of situation that's happened. You don't know how people are actually thinking. And for me, it's really almost exposed, I guess, the fact of how differently, and again, I'm trying to understand on an ongoing basis how people think. And this has been one where I've been surprised, where people, I'm like, I feel like I would know someone, almost the point of pegging them as be like, for sure, they're going to take the vaccine. And then to find that there is possibly a doubt. That's been another sort of challenging thing for me, where you think you know a situation or how a person might think, and then there's other things that obviously can really drive a different opinion there. So,
and the other thing is the masks. That's another very in society that's becoming very contentious. And the thing of it is that people don't stop to think. It's been said from the very beginning, not just in the United States, but all over the place. Masks are not about politics, and but yet, if somebody who has an immunodeficiency or are immunocompromised, and maybe they're getting the vaccine as well, and but there's still that concern that this highly contagious virus is out there, and they're wanting to wear a mask in public, or I'm very curious as to how, when things begin to wind down, how many people will continue to wear masks in public spaces like buses. And it's something that I even think of for myself, and then what happens is people, you've got people questioning you. Well, why are you wearing a mask? Are you afraid, or what is your reason for wearing a mask? And it's very personal reasons. And masks should not be looked at derogatory whether somebody wears one or not. It is that idea of societal changes that are happening, and how are we going to deal with them, and what kind of an open mind and a thought process are we having about our fellow human beings. One of the things that you had touched on as well was that idea of fear. You had said earlier, fear. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why, going back to our original question that I had asked you was, why do you think that people are so hesitant, or we are so hesitant to let go of old ways? And I think that fear is a big one. Fear of what comes next. Fear of uncertainty or failure if we let go, or if we do something differently, or if we do something that we feel is challenging us, but we are afraid that that we're going to be embarrassed, or that we're just going to fail at it. Fear is actually one of the biggest factors across all contexts. When I was talking earlier about business, personal, societal, in unlearning, fear is often the biggest factor. Some of the fear that keeps people from unlearning or learning in a new way is that feeling that somehow the outcome is going to be detrimental in some way. And so it almost freezes you in your spot. And another one is, that people struggle with unlearning that would be of interest too is what you might learn or a new awareness that you might gain. What does this mean, for my identity, this awareness that I'm getting, so there's that too.
I think the identity one is an interesting one too, just in another vein. I turned 40 earlier this year, and someone asked me, like, so what, anything changed different? And I said, the only thing I found out turning 40 is I can no longer freeze my eggs in Canada. What was interesting is talk about learning and unlearning, because I had this sort of wrestling of, what is these, like, check the box success as a woman? Isn't it in my own mind? I feel it's in many people's minds, where it's just kind of like married with children, have a great career, I guess, and there you go. And so in this process, though, what I came to realize in finding out that everything was fine, which is great. Wish I would have learned about this, asked this question earlier, maybe 10 years ago, but it was great to be able to sort of figure out, what the cycle was, and the fact that I was healthy, was that I didn't want to freeze my eggs. I was like, even though the nurses, like, obviously there was in a way conditioned that everyone who goes, majority I'm sure who go there are actually trying to get pregnant. Because the clinic is not just cycle monitoring, it's mostly like IVF and all these other treatments to have kids. And so every time I went there, I had to prepare myself. I was like, all the nurses are going to be really supportive of me, assuming I'm going to be doing this and having children and everything. And then the other thing that was, I think, a little different is that I was also expected to have a partner with me. And so, but then I was also encouragement of having children on my own, all of which I was like, I was not there yet. I was just looking to see if I was healthy internally in the process and whatnot. But it was like, it's still, I wrestle with it because it's an indicator of success, where it's, again, relearning or educating even my mom that I'll be fine, in older age, because there's, again, this conditioning that, and I mean, I come from a family where there's 4 children that will support our mother. And I still have this, the fear that we were talking about, where I was like, there's still a bit of doubt, where I was like, what happens when I'm older and I don't have children to support me? Just like, but I'm like, no, I can plan for that. And I have to say, like, even being a single, like, woman that trying to be successful, I remember at one point, I was definitely before I came to Ireland, I realized that my ambition and drive for success was because the world is made for 2 people. Most of the things that I wanted to do and buy or have a certain living standard would have been so much easier if I had 2 incomes, whereas I had to sort of supplement what would have been a second income to live the life. It was a bit of adjustment when I came to Ireland. It was very expensive to live in Dublin, as Charlie knows. And even then it blew my mind, because I met women who were 10, 20 years my senior, that were living with other people. And it's a normal thing there too. I think North American culture, I would say, is that normally you would expect to live on your own, but it was like just so crazy, I think, to make enough money. And to be fair, I was even struggling myself in Ireland. The rents are so high.
And when you're saying that these people that you knew were living with other people, you mean a roommate situation, housemate situation. You're not talking about living with a partner but not married. You're talking about actually renting a room or renting a part of a house that other people are renting, where you have, so like a friends type of a scenario. I just wanted to make sure that our listeners are very clear that when you said that they were living with someone or someone's, that that doesn't mean that they were with a partner sharing their finances. They're just sharing the cost of the stupid house that they live in. Yes.
And even here, like, I choose to live in downtown Toronto, which is expensive. But my quality of life, like, I've pretty much figured out that I don't like to commute. It's not too bad. I'm actually in Toronto, but I'd rather, to me, it's how you equate also. I think it's funny, we'd have the saying that time is money, but I don't think it has hit home to a lot of people. It always made me laugh when I saw people lined up for a little bit of a cheaper gas, but they're running their engines to wait to get to the pump. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me, a few cents. But also the idea of, like, waiting half an hour to get to the gas pump. I was like, what is that? How many cents is that I'm saving?
Mm-hmm.
So I am actually, I should qualify for the audience that I am in sales. So I have equated time as money. And in sales, return on time invested is a very big thing. And it's a game of success in terms of how efficient you can be with your time to, make the most, advantageous deals. So that also, I've been told by friends of mine that frame of reference does make me think about things a little bit differently. But Ireland actually challenged even those assumptions as to what success and happiness looks like. Shelley and I have a very good mutual friend, Marie Nugent, who would have said over the course of the 5 years that my levels of stress or that was related to work have changed because of how I value things differently. And now just like experiencing life, I would say, and that's probably what I missed during COVID is I like to experience different cultures and travel. To me, I would say I work to travel. It's probably my motto. Again, that does, when I stand back and think about that, I do know that is, again, another level of privilege. And what do I sort of do with that? And I think fear too, in that regard, because I feel it is recognize, like thinking, is it wrong to think through these things of privilege and almost, are you deserving or not? That is a philosophical question for yourself, which is very personal and deep, I think. Because when you think of excess, and I know me personally, again, we have another really great friend, Fabi, who we talked a lot about, again, commercialism and consumerism and what really makes you happy and letting go. And I am still in the process of unsubscribing to many a marketing email. Coincidentally, I'm in marketing and I recognize what they're trying to do, but stopping myself and saying, do I actually really need that at this point in time? But that's, again, the conditioning in trying to get out of a cycle that we've grown up in and recognize it for what it is. So that's, for me, the process of unlearning or relearning or learning it all is almost understanding the pieces and, how they fit in, but almost the bias of the pieces too, which is kind of interesting. And one of my really interesting learning from my own family, because they're just some conversations, is I remember saying just to male friends and family members that, this conversation makes me feel really uncomfortable. And it was interesting for me that word really resonated because I found that, I don't know what it is about that word, but it really worked to open up a discussion because those people cared about me. And so no one wants to hurt somebody, but the word uncomfortable, like, well, why do you feel uncomfortable? I'm like, your conversation and tone about this issue is really affecting me. And what I realize sometimes when we're angry about something, we speak in an angry kind of tone. How do I explain this? Like, when you disagree with someone, a lot of the times it's the rational brain that says this, whatever situation makes me feel really angry, or I really believe you're wrong in your understanding. But then really the other thing that's part of that is acknowledging the feeling behind it. And that's, for me, at least from the female, like the Me Too movement, is to understand and explain, how that makes me feel has been very impactful, because then you're moving beyond the facts, I think, of the situation. Because I feel like this situation of being a woman in this world, it has a factual side, but a very emotional, non-rational side. And in my kind of business, but I've applied it to life also, is decision making happens mostly from the irrational side. We don't like to acknowledge that, but it does. It's like, especially when you're into sales and you're trying to understand why someone makes a decision, it's like you get the facts to a certain point, but then the ultimate decision is based on irrational behavior. And it's understanding that even where it doesn't necessarily make sense is trying to then help people understand your situation. And I found in some cases is to take the irrational and pair it with it. And feelings are very irrational because as we know from relationships, there's no logical reason why something's happened, and why you feel the way you do, to explain that to somebody else.
I wanted to ask you, we've talked a lot about personal, unlearning from a personal perspective. We talked about unlearning from a societal perspective, which obviously, it's very obvious that they're all interconnected. But what I'd like to know is, do you think that unlearning is vital in today's workplace? And if so, why? Or if not, why?
Yeah. And again, I'm very fortunate to have a team that I manage, as well as working with other organizations. And it's interesting because as a profession, and I actually asked that it stay in my title, to have sales, is generally people don't like salespeople because they seem to want to push something on you that you don't need. It was the used car salesman would be the, and to me, it doesn't have to be that way. And one of my sort of touch points is maybe unlearning. How does that describe that in the workplace? Is standing back and understanding the people behind the decision, and the fact that we can have, again, from my negotiation sort of background, is you can come together and have a mutually beneficial solution that benefits both parties. So yes, I sell you a service and I make money on it in order to operate. That's how the world works. But you can also get value from what it is that I do. And that's how I've always presented what I do as a service, both here in Canada as well as in Ireland, and to find that fit. And it's definitely been successful, because to me, it just doesn't make any sense. But it's sort of the way, because the sales role has targets, and you have to financial, and you have to make those, that sometimes people, I can see, out of fear of not being able to make them, push things onto people that they don't necessarily need. And for whatever reason, I guess this is a field that works for me, is I've never felt driven by fear, because what trumps always is a meaningful relationship with someone. And part of that for me too is just sort of standing back. I guess reputation for me means a lot. And so if I gave you something that in the end you would be like, ooh, that Victoria really gave me something I didn't really need and I spent a lot of money on it, I would feel personal pain. I would feel like it really is. So I don't know if it's just my own sort of makeup, is that would be far worse for me than trying to meet a target that wasn't achievable by me in the first place. But honestly, to me, it's a great position. So I've sort of thrived in this position because I just like to talk to people, ask questions, find out if there's a need. And so what I've been trying to do in my own job now, in terms of learning, especially leading a team, is the foresight is to never get myself into a situation where I have to do something that is uncomfortable, which is usually comes to like correction to, a situation, be it targets not being met, and so having read, getting into this position, and different sort of philosophies about that, is glass half full. I have an awesome team, and I attended a seminar actually at Facebook in Dublin, where someone was speaking about leadership, and it really hit home about this concept of, your job is to make sure that your team can be the best that they can be. And as a leader, what you're doing is making sure all the pieces around them are supporting that. And Shelley, I love process, and even in this world, people, to me, I always say process can set you free. And so what I try to do behind the scenes is create an environment where they can be successful. And so what I try to do is figure out where the problems, might be occurring, because I know from listening, if I hear something more than once or a few times, I'm like, it's obviously an issue, and it doesn't have to be an issue. So let's figure it out, and why that's causing a problem. So for me, I feel like, in a way, I want people to continue to do the successful job that they're doing. So not that they have to change for the sake of change. And that's, I think, a good concept of unlearning, is recognizing that some things are actually okay. And then, but understanding And again, the probably word that will always be worrisome for me is status quo. Again, complacency, don't like that. Status quo, I don't like that either. Um, because in this world, there's always something I feel like that can be done a little bit better. It doesn't mean you have to change your product and services. It's just like, for example, with my team, they're doing a great job. And so through the course of our conversations, we actually have formal kind of points during the year where we talk about how the job's going. It's reviews, I guess, in a way, but more like a dialogue. And an idea came up, which sits close to my heart, of like having a boot camp once a month, where we take a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours, and what we've sort of figured out is one person will talk about a day in the life in their job, or we'll have featured speakers, and then we spend another hour or so talking about a few chapters of a book. Right now we're reading Good to Great, which is again one of the top 10 like business books to read, but it gives us a chance to have a bit of a dialogue outside of our everyday work. And it was a principle that I took from working with startups in Ireland. And so what do you call that, unlearning or just like relearning or applying different disciplines? I found a lot of what the startup culture does. And what they would do is once a month, I think I've heard from founders, is they would have, like say in software, they would just have everybody just do whatever they wanted, write their own code, do something a little bit different, present it to the team. I've heard about it in the restaurant industry too, that, someone can create their own dish that they can then present to the team. Everyone gets to try it. And I was like, how can we do this in my own work? And so it actually came out of discussion with one of my employees. And I said, we should do that. And we've been doing it now for a few months. And everyone, what's really cool is it's actually spreading to the company. It's just with my team. Everyone's heard about what we've been doing, which is great because I'd love to implement it where it's part of the team. But what I find now in our discussion is people will reference the book that we're reading. It's like, oh yeah, that's really, I see this in what I'm doing my every day. And the other thing we realize too is we don't actually fully know what everyone does in the company in a day in a life. You know enough to get by, but it's been really interesting to hear from the people who deliver the services what it is that they do, like even in a little bit of minutia, because there's things that we've learned like, oh, I didn't even realize that's what actually happens. And so, but it's honestly, it's creating a forum for that, which is interesting because we've talked about society, we've talked about like different sort of realms of learning and unlearning, and you have to foster a space and they're like for that to happen. Otherwise, it's literally just lip service. And I think many a person would say with a lot of these bigger issues is that those issues have been around for a long time. It's just no one has given them airtime or actually moved beyond the surface level kind of agreement. And that's why I think when you talk about business and unlearning, is you can have a seminar, you can read a book, but unless you provide a space for it to become a habit, or is it a habit forming, or at least for an understanding of how to implement the learnings in a space like that, you're not going to see any change. And one of the concepts that we're even reading in the book, which is great to hear the dialogue from my team, is it's not even just having your employees be able to say what it is that they are thinking, is are they actually being heard? And so we discussed that because and how we can, even as a company, can get better about that. So it's exciting because I feel like any change has to happen from within, and the people themselves have to make that change happen, as opposed to one person telling you what it is you should believe. So for me, it's been really rewarding to be able to take my own learnings, but open up to the fact that, my team might have other ideas about that. Being very supportive. The owner of the company is really good too, to sort of provide that space for that to happen. But we're in progress.
Yeah.
For sure.
And, earlier you said you when you were talking, I don't know if you even noticed it, but you questioned yourself and you're like, I don't know if that's actually unlearning or is it adapting? It is unlearning because you're taking these formal learning and communication that would be traditionally what you see in business and in the business world, and you've adapted, right, to more agile learning, to a collaborative working approach. And that most certainly is unlearning, because as you were saying, you've taken some things that you've learned that are different in other places, and you've brought them into your new role, into what you're doing, and you're using those with your staff and with your employees. And though, yeah, it is, the adapt and change and rethink, those are actually all part of unlearning, because you're kind of setting aside those old traditional ways of doing things and doing things new, more innovative and different. So that would definitely be unlearning. And employees need to unlearn in order to move forward alongside their company, so that they can move ahead also. So, and work more effectively, and not only further themselves, but also further their company's mission. So absolutely, what you've been talking about is unlearning. So don't doubt yourself for 1 second. It is.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think too is having had various like leaders and what I liked and what I didn't like from them also. Um, I think it's also your willingness to unlearn or challenge like how you conceptualize managing a team of people. It's actually harder than it looks like. They say some people are not meant to be managers of people. They're better as a sole contributor, and that's not a knock. Like I think some people are really great. They should really just be sole contributors, because managing people is difficult, but it's very rewarding. It's just like, as I say, finding what makes them tick and supporting that through a positive environment. Um, because I actually I'm very visual, and we obviously are bound by like a fiscal year. And I thought one day I was just like go for a bit of a walk, and I was thinking, man, like meeting a sales target is like running a marathon. Just creating the necessary like environment, and the fact that you don't have to like beat. I think about people who win the marathon race. It's not the ultimate goal. It's just to finish and have encouragement so that we can finish together, and obviously in a good standing, because at the end of the day there's a business objective. Part of the thing too I find too about the learning and unlearning of the office environment is encouraging dialogue, truly encouraging dialogue, to talk about things that maybe are not working for them. And I feel like managers in my past have never even talked to me about that, but the idea that I might one day leave the position in the past, and the fact that that's not a bad thing. I don't know, in the workplace, I feel like I've always felt that leaving a job was like something is bad in terms of it happens. So you don't want to discuss that sort of situation. And as a manager now, people is just to be open and saying, I know that you choose to be here, and I want to make sure that this is a place you want to be at. So let's talk about that. But at the same time, on your career path, what do you want to learn? Like, what do you want to do? And can we achieve that here with the understanding, as much as I want to keep on my employees, that I feel like people who enjoy, because I've been that person, like when I left my job here and went to Ireland, I wanted to leave it in a really good place because I cared about my clients. And so I want to foster an environment with my own team, because we've all worked with people who have not been happy, where they were, and the fit isn't there. I've always vowed myself that I will leave an environment where I'm not feeling my best. Because I think we all know that as much as you think you can hold that in, people know when you're not happy.
Yeah, I was saying, when you're in a toxic work environment, it's
Just
lethal, it's toxic. And and sometimes the thing of it is that you're so dedicated and committed and loyal to the cause that you actually don't realize how toxic and how lethal it was until you're out the other side, until you look back and go, oh, I wouldn't go back there for love or money.
But there's also a fit. And it's interesting, having gone through the job search process and then obviously been in different jobs too, is and again, I always check myself, because it is a privilege. I've done well. I've been able to get different positions. So I've had the luxury of being able to move positions. I recognize that. But just in terms of the fit, because I find, yeah, there can be a toxic environment for sure, but other times also is recognizing that you've, and people call it different things, outgrown the position, or and catching that sooner if possible. Because again, with my own team, it's having a dialogue to make sure the fit is still there. And what's again really cool about the place that I work is that we have people who have moved positions to different parts of the company, and been able to sort of talk about that kind of transition, which doesn't always happen. We're not a very big company, but it's great to know that there is that. But even in my own role before I left, and I'm glad that in a way I was able to leave, not glad, what I'm trying to say is that I was able to have an open discussion about my future and leave on good terms, where I wasn't able to get what I wanted, but that didn't have to be a bad thing, because I was able to then do what I did and learn what I did in Ireland. And I'm better for it now in terms of, the position I'm in today also, but it doesn't always seem evident at the time. But I was ready for an adventure also, which was kind of neat to be able to take off and live abroad. But yeah, it's walking the talk, and as I say, it's still looking to the rational points of things that we know to be true, and then safely adapting and moving along. So
Yeah. And, there's something that you said, earlier, about that concept of removing sort of unsupported belief systems, or things that, that you believe to be true, aren't anymore, and that's very much, kind of what is happening in the world of education. Because of COVID, obviously launched many of the levels of education into fast forward motion. And there has been a lot of conversation about this idea of unlearning and removing those unsupported belief systems, and those, that whole idea of old ways don't open new doors mentality. And this movement that's happening is happening, from my perspective, very much so in higher education. And it's challenging the traditional definitions of education, the classroom, the teacher and student, because everything was, put online. And it is, I will say that it's a bit more complicated and slow to progress in the tertiary education. So in primary and post-primary or compulsory education, because they still have that, they still operate under that fear of making any major changes without the blessing of the educational governing bodies. But in higher education, there's been a little bit more autonomy and freedom to challenge those, those traditional classroom and learning, formal learning roles. And there's a particular expert that I follow in education, and I've heard him speak a couple of times. I follow him on Twitter. His name is Jesse Stommel, and he is an excellent example of somebody who's chasing that unlearning model in education. He's taking risks, and he's is breaking those traditions and standards in a really positive way. There's many more that are doing this as well, because like I said, in higher education world, this conversation has been going on for the past year and a half. But the interesting thing about him, and I want to get your take on this, is that he doesn't grade his students. In fact, he calls it ungrading. So here we are talking about unlearning. And he also calls it radical assessment. And basically what he believes is that grading by any of the conventional, traditional academic metrics actually undermines the work of the student. So he says grades are not incentive. They're not good incentive, giving grades. Grades are not good feedback. Grades encourage competitiveness over collaboration. Grades are not good markers of learning. Grades don't reflect idiosyncratic, subjective, or emotional character of learning. And he says grades aren't fair. So basically what he does is he challenges adult and higher educators to look at the mission and the vision statement of their universities, and then to look at their assessment policies side by side. He says that rarely, if ever, do the two align. And this is an excellent argument for changing assessment delivery and embracing assessment strategies that embrace the mission and the vision of the college or the university, is to look at that and then to align your assessment, the way you assess, with the vision statements and with the graduate attributes and these types of things these expectations that we have of these students when they graduate. I find his work fascinating. And so I was very curious, being that you are a business-minded person who's obviously gotten your master's, you've been through the higher education, you've had grades, you've had, this. What do you think about this?
It's funny, I have to say, I did get my master's just to be make sure. So it's interesting. I wanted to pursue it, but I didn't have the grades actually to get in.
Interesting. Okay.
I feel like the grades was a carrot though. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear this guy, because I feel like that structure did help me. But then the thing that's interesting is I had unstructured opportunities. And I'd have to really look back and say, was that why I became very successful? Or is it just the combination of the two? I benefited from elementary school. So we go in the Catholic school system to grade 8 and then grade 9. For me, I had a 13th year. That's how we sort of separate our schooling. And in elementary, I was identified as what they call gifted. So I went to another school where I was able to basically learn and do projects on anything I felt that one was sharks one year. One other year, I scared the teacher and did Nostradamus, that I thought was really, especially in a Catholic school. I literally had a conversation like, is everything okay? And I was like, yeah, just thought this was really interesting. I want to understand how someone could actually predict the end of the world. I don't know, it seemed logical to me. Now I'm sure it makes sense to you, right? You're like, yeah, Victoria would totally do a project on Nostradamus. And then, so that gave me sort of a understanding. And then I came back to the regular sort of school system the other days of the week. I guess there was some self-motivation. And again, if I had the open, parents that were willing to let me do these things. So that's definitely there. So it's interesting, like the non-marking thing, because I have to say, so my father passed when I was younger, and I know he definitely was very keen on marks. So we would definitely talk about that type of stuff. So I think it was a carrot that was there, but I have to say, in a situation of circumstance, that I was afforded a couple of extra opportunities by chance. I don't know, that they had a gifted program that let me open up my mind to other kind of possibilities. And I don't know if I actually got graded. I don't remember getting grades. But the other thing too is having good teachers. When my father passed when I was in grade 9, I was in the enriched math class because I was actually good. But that event like stunted my math brain growth. And so, but I remember the teacher who knew my potential allowed me to get into a course for calculus because she knew I might go to U of T, University of Toronto, and in psychology, for some reason, you needed calculus. And so she let me take it. I just scraped by, I think, with the help of one of my friends, and didn't have to go into U of T anyways. But so in that regard, a little bit of flexibility from the teachers obviously aided. So the end goal, they knew where I was headed. So in that respect, I guess the grades, again, it was still a carrot of meaning to get that credit, but it didn't stop me from learning. Towards the end of my time in high school, someone came up to me, and now you know my background in math, it's very shaky, asked me for help with math. I laughed out loud. And I was like, no, that you're looking to my other group of friends. I was the only person who didn't really do well in math. All the other guys did. And so I was just like, well, no. But I laughed because I was like, wow, people think I'm good at math because I'm like, it's like osmosis. We just like rub off.
Exactly.
I really wish. But that's another thing too, is just, that's a hard one. Like to help people unlearn what they think you represent.
Oh, yeah.
How do you unpack that one? I'm just kind of like, and that's like, and get a little tangent where people like, I almost see that as in terms of the dating world, where it's just kind of like people are like, oh, it's because you're so successful and tall and, you know, whatever, and just hold yourself, that it's almost like off-putting to other men. I was like, really? Maybe there's an unlearning in society that needs to happen, where it's like we all, I don't know what that is, but that's another strange. It's again, is women.
I'm sorry, you think men are interested in confident women, feminist women, you know, outspoken women with a voice, with, you know, again, body autonomy and all of it. Like, what?
It's unlearning of the fact of, you know, what's attractive. And to be fair, I have met men who have found that very attractive, but that's another societal unlearning of like the enriched lives. And I found myself saying this because I really like the term, is like, if I've dated someone or, you know, have a long-term relationship, is calling them a partner. And having a partner is a great way to term to someone as, and regardless.
Yeah, it sounds equal. It's equal. It's about equality. And
it's working together, because as a partner, like you're being a two-legged race or something like that, you need to work together to get to the finish line. So
I think it's a three-legged race.
Like, oh yeah, two-legged would be a little intense.
So, well, Victoria, that was a perfect segue to the concluding of our conversation. Well, I'm going to go to bed tonight thinking about, how do you run a two-legged race? I mean, we all run a two-legged race, but how do you run a two-legged race with a partner? That's a good one. So I'm going to be thinking about that one. But Victoria, thank you so much for spending this time with me. It was such deep and meaningful conversation, and I got so much out of it. And I know our listeners are going to get tons out of it. And keep unlearning, my friend.
Yes. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion on A Dash of Salt, a space where you'll always find fresh and current discussions on society and learning today, seasoned with just the right touch of experts in education and a dash of sociological imagination. Please be sure to like and share this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to A Dash of Salt on Podbean so that you don't miss the next episode. Thanks so much, and we'll chat again soon.